In the spirit of unity and oneness, we're going to link together a psychological concept with some Christian ideas, a line from the Quran and a line from Ram Dass to try to continue to promote growth in all of us, but also worldwide togetherness. So we're going to start with the psychological concept of confirmation bias. Now, confirmation bias is the idea that some people, actually all of us for a long period of our lives, have a tendency to look for new evidence to confirm that which we already believe. Okay? So we are actually looking to confirm our pre-existing beliefs, not necessarily trying to expand ourselves and include other. It's ego, wants to continue to believe what I already believe, and so we look for evidence to back that up. No better example of that than vaccines in the COVID debate, okay? How many times, and as a therapist, I could see 8 people in a day, and they'll go back and forth between, I read this study that says, this expert says, no, this expert says. And be like, well, that's interesting. You're believing the expert you want to believe in. And then if you bring up the fact that, well, somebody else just told me some other expert said that, they're stupid and wrong. Okay, Now, I'm not taking a side on that. I'm just saying it's a thing. And there could be evidence to the contrary, and some people draw the line in the sand and say, I'm not going to cross that because it's too much for the ego to give in, right? It's too difficult. I don't want to admit I was wrong. The ego gets wounded over that. And so it'll look for evidence to back itself up. Now that happens all the time in relationships and in our discussions with people, just in the sports world. I watch on Twitter and people will argue about it. Did the Steeler hit the Bengal too hard? Is that a penalty? No, he did it this way. No, he did it this way. And then people argue about that. And I guess that's fun for some people. And that's totally fine. But it's confirmation bias in many ways. We tend to see things the way we want to see them. In physics, quantum physics, there's a concept called the observer effect that says pretty much the same thing. The way you look at the world somehow, like a mirror, reflects back to you that which you're looking for. Okay? That's called confirmation bias. It stands in direct contrast to this F. Scott Fitzgerald line I've had up here since pre-COVID, so I'm sure it's now paint, it's no longer a dry erase, in which the test of first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in mind and still retain the ability to function. Can you live in a world where there's maybe contrary evidence and still be at peace? Could you live in a world where people disagree with you? You're pro-vax or anti-vax, and then others disagree with you. Can you get through a phase of Roe v. Wade issues without losing your mind, right? All of that is firmly physical world debate stuff, and it's important to the physical world, okay? But in the interest of unity, again, we're going to expand that out using this little drawing, because confirmation bias also works here in this little drawing. So here we have a 3-dimensional world. And what I have is a bunch of people in the 3-dimensional world. And that little dot I have where our brains are, we're just going to call mind for something Apostle Paul said. But it could be soul, could be spirit, could be consciousness, but whatever. Non-physical, okay? The type of mind that F. Scott Fitzgerald was talking about is inside of each one of us, okay? Well, it's whether or not we work it out that matters. What does Apostle Paul say about this? In Romans 12:2, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be renewed or transformed by the renewing of your mind, okay? So what is this world? Well, this is the world of flesh. We're physical beings inside this world. We also have the mind of Christ or the mind of Buddha, okay? We have that too, but for most of us, it's a latent experience. It's there, but we haven't really worked it out yet. And we're very much interested in the ego aspect of this world, okay? So I want you to visualize this little square here as concrete block. Imagine you're stuck in a room and there's just one door, only one way to get out. And it's this small little exit right here, okay? And we're all stuck in the same room. And that guy in that corner insists that this is the way out. And this guy in this corner insists that it's the way out. Or this gal over here insists this is the way out, right? And you have a bunch of people arguing, this is the way, no, this is the way, no, this is the way. Well, guess what? The room has long since decided what the way is, okay? Each of us in our own little myopic ego ways don't get to decide what the way is. This is what the Tao is all about. It is the way. The universe has already decided the way for us. And it didn't decide it. It is what it is, okay? There's a way, all right. And it's this little opening. And I'm going to describe what that is. So in the world of flesh, we got people arguing about what's good and what's bad and what laws should we have, right? And what physical things do we consider to be a positive and what do we consider to be negative? And who's right and who's wrong? That's all locked inside this world. And if that's all we're doing, anti-F. Scott Fitzgerald, trying to see opposing ideas and maintain a certain functionality, we argue for, via confirmation bias, what we think is right. This is why we have such an intensity, again, in politics, of people digging in the sand and saying, no, this is right, no, this is right. And maybe one side is right, maybe, but it's still firmly inside this concrete box. Well, the only way out of this, again, three-dimensional world, is to consider the possibility that maybe there's a 4D world. Now, I know that the fourth dimension is time and physics, but we're going to keep this simple by thinking of the four-dimensional world as just a higher world or another world or a world outside this one, okay? And if such a world exists, we know our bodies don't get there, right? We see what happens to our bodies. They stay stuck in this physical world upon death. Might something get to this world? Might we have access to that world right now? Oh yeah, we do. It's through the mind, the spirit, the non-physical aspect of ourselves. Not only is that how we escape this world upon death, but we can have access to that world now. See, I've got this one little soldier here who escapes. What does Jesus say in Matthew 7, 13 and 14? Enter through the narrow gate. That's the narrow gate. Wide is the gate that leads to destruction. That's all the rest of this, okay? All the various people are saying, this is the way out, this is the way out, this is the way out. And that leads to destruction. This is Buddha's first noble truth, dukkha. The world is unsatisfying, right? You're going to suffer. We all suffer. Everyone that's ever been here has suffered. Why? Because we can't escape the clutches of the ego. It's so strong. It's so difficult. And we are born stupid. Actually, we're born bright and open, but then we get stupid because we get taught wrong. And then we start to take on these identities, right? This is the whole issue. This is the land of labels. This is all the physical stuff that we judge each other by, and then we argue over who's right and who's wrong based upon things like gender and orientation and religion and political affiliation and financial or socioeconomic status and all of that. All of it labels. And if we get overwhelmed with that stuff or over-identified with this stuff, we stay stuck in this world, okay? And that leads to destruction. This is why we're going to argue. This is why we do argue. Again, who's right or who's wrong. That doesn't get anyone out. What does Jesus say? To enter through the narrow gate. The way is wide, that leads to destruction, and that's what most people do. But he says narrow gate leads to life, and that's what few are doing, okay? Well, here's the narrow gate. And you're not going to escape this world through arguing good and bad about physical stuff, who's right or wrong. You can, however, escape this world through your mind, through renewing of your mind. And here's where confirmation bias fits back in. Take spiritual teachings or religion and make it about the flesh. You're going to look for evidence. Now, how many people do I know read the Bible looking for evidence of their belief that they already have? And then change your belief on any topic, and then you'll go scrolling through the Bible looking for another way to look at it, okay? This is why I see again and again and again, both Democrats and Republicans are claiming Jesus as their own. And here's why. I'll show you right here in the Bible. This is what it says, okay? Confirmation bias much, okay? And now, if that's fun, again, have at it. And it's fine to do that. But for the most part, and I've experienced this a lot myself, it feels like banging my head against the wall. And yet, all the great teachers, and in this case, I'm talking Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, and Muhammad, all in a spirit of oneness, are saying the same thing. It's not about any of that. Okay? What we need to learn how to do is escape that world by dropping all those judgments and all those labels. And that's all of us. Okay? If you are right about a topic and the other guy's wrong, you have to drop that judgment, right? And if you're wrong about something, you got to admit it and drop the judgment of yourself as well. That's what gets us out. So the quantum physics, which is the new eye stuff, all of this over here, it all works perfectly. And there's so many different minutiae that goes into this, and it's always working like gravity, right? Always working even when we're not paying attention. We're constantly confirming our biases. But what if you flip over to the idea, who are you? Are you 3D physical world being, or are you 4D spiritual being, this more of a mental being, more of a spiritual being? And once you flip over to that, confirmation bias kicks in again, but on a different level, okay? Now it's like, wait a minute, maybe we are all one, which is what Jesus says when he was asked the most important commandment. It starts with, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. The most important teaching in Islam, Tawhid, is that God is one, okay? The science of entanglement is all about the oneness of things. And it's like, okay, I'm going to start playing around with that idea. Okay, maybe we're all one. I'd like to look into that. Seek and you will find. Next thing you know, confirmation bias shows up again. And you start looking for outside, if you will, fourth dimensional spiritual unity type things. And then you go read the Bible or the Quran or any various teachings. Like I said, green eggs and ham. Go read anything looking for the truth of the unity of things, and you'll get that confirmed. Okay? It always works all the time. Again, like gravity, this doesn't stop. We've all got confirmation bias. So here's where Muhammad in the Quran, Surah 256, that just means chapter 2, verse 256, says that truth stands out clear from error. Well, here's where that fits in. Bang your head against the wall. See how that works. Will it get you out? Of course not. Eventually it just gives you a headache. Okay? Seek for the opening. Seek for the path of least resistance. Next thing you know, you're traveling through the narrow gate and you're like, well, that sure felt better. This is going to be painful for a while, but eventually you're going to get out. You're going to go, oh man, I should have done that a long time ago. Okay? Truth stands out clear from error because it's obvious once you take that leap into the fourth dimensional spiritual world. Once you take the leap over to, well, maybe I'm not Steve, white American dude. Maybe I should work on forgiving Tom Brady for beating the Steelers for so long. Most of my Steeler friends out there hate that idea. I don't have to work on it, but I had to, okay? I didn't like the resentment that it held over me. And then death, same thing, this idea that death is this bad thing and that we should all be so afraid of it or whatever. That's a very American thing. And I went through a lot of death or thought about it a lot. In my work, I see it a lot. Until then I started to realize, well, maybe this is what happens when we die. And there's this other place. And then I started to look for evidence for that. All right, so that's truth standing out clear from error. It always feels better to forgive than it does to resent. It always feels better to be fearless than to worry about stuff, right? Courage always beats cowardice, and this stuff is clear. To know that you're a spiritual being, rather than to hope or think about it, is totally liberating. Remember, in the Book of the Dead, recognition and liberation are simultaneous. It happens at the same time. The ability to realize you're a spiritual being on the outside of the system is to be freed from the system. Okay, that's liberation. And what feeling comes with it? Well, it's clear, according to Muhammad, it's clear that it's a peaceful thing, and that's what we're all seeking. And here's where Ram Dass, American who went on an Eastern journey and was heavily influenced by yogic philosophies, and he said in his classic book, Be Here Now, to him who has had the experience, no explanation is necessary. To him who has not had the experience, no explanation is possible. Well, confirmation bias, it's the same thing. If you've stepped outside this box and got over into this side of things, and you start to practice seeing the world as one, and seeing the prophets as teaching the same thing, and that everything is working out, Romans 8:28, for the good, for those who love God, which is for those who are being spiritual, now you can drop all your judgments of others, especially those who have different political points of view, and work on working together, spiritually speaking. Because if you're arguing with that person, they're banging their head against their wall too. Well, kumbaya, let's come together and work on something. It's what Rumi says. Let's get out there beyond right and wrong to the field of knowing, really, in which there isn't any right and wrong. The field of spirit. We all come from that place, and then we get stuck in this box, okay? So if you've had that experience, guess what? Confirmation bias kicks in, and you work on it again, and you repeat it again, and then you have a certain truth come to you, and a peace comes over you, and you don't really care about influencing anyone else anymore. Well, you want to influence, but you don't need to force it, like Muhammad says in this same passage. There is no compulsion in religion, or as it says in the Tao, the sage doesn't speak, he waits to be asked. You don't have to force that. You don't have to Bible thump. It's just going to happen as it needs to anyways. Only those who are interested in stepping outside this box does it come to them. Seek and you will find. But you got to die to self, right? I must decrease so he may increase, and all those teachings. Buddha's third truth. I got to detach from this world in order to understand or experience what this world is, right? Then you step outside the box, and then others who have not had the experience tell you you're crazy, right? Oh, that's just stupid, it's silly, there's no science to it. I'm like, yeah, there is no science to perception. That's true. There's plenty of good science to spiritual people tend to be happier. That's very true. Probably healthier in many ways. I don't know that for sure, but it makes sense. The more kind, compassionate, forgiving, peaceful you are, the better your heart's going to work for sure. But it leads to a sense of peace that if someone hasn't had the experience, they'll say none is possible. And until they make the decision to go looking for that, confirmation bias is going to keep giving them evidence to prove their point. And guess what the universe does like a mirror? It reflects that back to them. You go look in your mirror, I look in my mirror, I just get me reflected back to me, and you get you reflected back to you. That never stops, right? So if you're looking for inside the box stuff, that's what you're going to get. If you're looking for outside the box stuff, that's what you're going to get. One of them works, though, eternally. It's stepping outside that box. That's what works. And to have had that experience, as Ram Dass would say, is all the proof you need.